Hello, everyone. I am Courtney Smith. I am a CRA2 with Thermo Fisher Scientific, and I am also your co-hostess with the mostest. I love you all, and I love being here. And I'm glad that we are back with our chats for Black women in clinical research. So I'm ready to get started.
Yes, thank you, Courtney. So, Bridget, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. So my name is Bridget Chapital. I have worked in research industry for over 2 decades in a variety of different roles. I currently work in patient and site engagement for a large CRO here in the US.
Thank you, Bridget.
Mhm.
Nadine, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hello, everyone. I'm Nadine Spring. I am a full-time public health professor. I've worked in clinical research at the site level from entry level as research assistant to director. And I also have my own side consulting business called Springwell 360. And I'm the author of the book Mastering Clinical Research, which is an Amazon bestseller. And here's my book.
Yes, thank you so much. And if you were at the Black Women in Clinical Research Conference, we were giving out Nadine's book and Bridget's book was available as well. But thank you everyone for joining us tonight. So we are going to kick it off with these questions. So first, what inspired you to pursue becoming a published author within the clinical research space? And if anyone wants to go first.
I guess I'll go. So, working in public health, I was often asked questions about, how do I enter into the field of clinical research? And personally, myself, I ended up in clinical research by accident. I didn't go to college thinking I was going to end up working in research. But I graduated with a bachelor's degree in biology and started out research, entry level as a research assistant. And one of the things I noticed working in research, whether it was as a research manager or director of clinical trials, and I worked for 6 years on lupus clinical trials, and lupus disproportionately affects women of color. And what I saw when I was enrolling into these trials were that the people being enrolled in the trials did not make up the demographics of the people living day to day with the condition. And so I wrote my book, Master in Clinical Research, as a way to bridge the gap and inform people of clinical research as a viable career path. And a lot of the work I also do is to inform people about clinical trials as an option to their care. So, the book was written with students, phlebotomists, medical assistants, foreign medical grads, all, in mind so that they are aware of clinical research, that pathway to take as a viable career pathway in, health sciences.
So thank you, Nadine. I hear that a lot of times when I talk to people. They didn't find out about clinical research in college. And I like to say that clinical research found me. And I guess, it
Yeah.
found us all. Bridget, what about yourself?
So what led me to becoming a published author is that, I have my undergraduate degree is actually in health education, and my graduate degree also have master's in health education administration. And so, even though I've worked my entire career in clinical research, I really feel like education is really my core strength. And so, through any job that I had, whether it was starting out as a research coordinator, working for the IRB, working as in quality assurance and auditing, every step of the way there was somebody that I had to educate about like clinical research, whether it's an investigator and their staff, whether it's a patient family. And so that was just always a space that I felt very at home in. And, as a kid, I just loved to read. Like I was just reading everything all the time. At first, I wanted to be like a librarian because I thought that all you got to do was just sit in the library and read books all day. Like this was what I thought when I was in elementary school. And so, as I was just kind of like moving through my career, I just really wanted a way to teach people exactly what research was about. And, I reached a certain point where I ended up starting a company called Hypothesis Haven Science Club. We actually teach clinical research awareness to elementary school kids. And as a part of that, I was coming across different curriculum that we were using or trying to use that, was really trying to break down research to a level that children and their families could understand. But I just really couldn't quite find the exact thing that I wanted. And so it just kind of came to me that, hey, like I should write my own, write my own books. And so I started Bright Ideas Loading Books, which is actually just my company that will be publishing books. But my idea for my first book was just that, people need to understand the vocabulary of clinical research before they can even, kind of understand anything else. And so my first book, A Kid's Guide to Clinical Research, is really just sort of taking you step by step through the alphabet and teaching like each of the words that have to do with our industry.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
So I'm going to kind of talk about challenges because I know a lot of times that there are unique challenges. So, were there any unique challenges that you experienced with navigating, I would say, the publishing world?
hmm Well, so for me, I actually self-published my book. And so with that, it was just kind of a learning curve of, first of all, even before I got to the point of like, how do I even publish the book? It was like, how do I even write this book? Like, how do I put it together? And so that actually took me a couple of years. I mean, I definitely had it in mind what I wanted to do. Um, like I think just going back to like probably even about 3 or 4 years ago, I had the concept, but just to put it on paper was one whole process that took a very long time. Just getting the words right. And then I actually hired a book marketing coach to help me kind of through the process of like, okay, how do you even put out a book? And so she was the one that taught me like how to publish through Amazon, and to do all the steps that you need to do. But it's not just enough to just say, hey, okay, put the book up here, everybody buy it. The art of like marketing your book and letting people know that your book is coming, like even before it's out, just building that buzz and that interest and connecting with your ideal readers so that they can support you when the book comes out.
Thank you. Yeah, I know that process can be rather difficult. I met a couple of people who, not trying to sound a little not positive, but some of the people that were writing books, I didn't even understand because I don't understand the process, but they said that they weren't able to get their book published. So I thought that was kind of interesting because I'm like, how do you even get there where they tell you that you can't publish your book? Or, I know that
Mm-hmm.
there can definitely be some challenges with publishing. What about you, Nadine? You are on mute.
Well, I think while she's coming off
Okay.
mute, I can say that with the traditional publishing route, that's probably sounds like what you're talking about. Like that is just a whole different thing of itself, because I do have friends that are trying to pursue that. But I think for us, and especially for people who you just have an expertise that you're wanting to share, not that you want to just be like, oh, I'm an author and I just, have want a publishing company behind me to help push me into all the spaces. But if you have your personal expertise and knowledge that you want to share, I think the self-publishing route is definitely like a really good, really good option to pursue because, there's no barriers there. Like anybody can do that.
Okay, so with you saying that, it makes me think of another question, but I'll try and put a
Mhm.
pin in it and let Nadine answer the question.
Sorry about that, guys. Hopefully we can edit that part out. My little one came in here. It is 7 p.m. Eastern, so he was bugging me for a little bit. So in terms of the challenges I faced, first of all, imposter syndrome, right? Who am I to be writing this book on this topic? And then who's gonna buy my book, right? Who's gonna look at me? I was the first in my family to get a bachelor's degree. Like, who's gonna look at me as like the authority figure and buy my book? That was a huge one for me to overcome in terms of like challenges. I've also never written a book before. And Danielle, I have another book that I've had on the back burner for about 2 years, right? Which I interviewed you for, but haven't had the chance to actually write it and publish it yet. Because I've been busy with this one. I have another idea for a book about health equity trailblazers. and I interviewed Danielle for this book, but I haven't written the book yet. But there's just so many barriers. Time is one of them. Like I mentioned, imposter syndrome. But then once you actually, get the momentum going, just keep going because your voice deserves to be heard. You need to get that message out there. And all of us sitting here, we all know the importance of, especially representation in clinical research, which happens to be my main reasoning for writing my book.
Mhm.
Thank you. It almost sounds like once you write one book, then you're like, I need to write five more. So it's or you get more ideas as you are
Mhm.
writing your first book. So the question that I was going to ask is, what is the difference between traditional publishing and, you were speaking about
Mhm.
self-publishing, Bridget.
Yeah, so I mean, traditional publishing is where like you have like a random house or like you actually just have what's called an imprint behind you. And so with that, from my understanding of it, is that they'll put all the money into marketing your book, getting you out there, all that kind of stuff. But instead of just getting, really just the revenue directly from your book sales, you're getting, an agreed upon, stipend from the publishing company, for example. And so there's trade-offs with that. But the number one trade-off is that they have to accept you. So it's not just an automatic, oh, here's my book. It's wonderful. It's kind of, I don't want to say gatekeeping in a negative way, but basically that's kind of what it comes down to. I mean, like I was saying, I have a friend who, she really just wants to be a writer. Like that's what she wants to do. And so she's written, a couple of books and now is just in the process of shopping it around to different imprints to see if they think it matches whatever their, demographic is or whatever their idea is of the kind of book that they want. But it's something where you don't have necessarily that power to move forward unless somebody picks up your books. And a lot of times she's even told me that what happens is whenever you see like the author come out and they're like New York Times bestsellers or whatever, usually that's not even their first book they tried. That could have been like their fifth, 10th book, but it's just the one that happens to catch on. And then they're able to kind of come behind that and put out the books that they really, wanted to put out. So there's just less control for the author that way. Whereas, if you're self-published, you really just kind of have that autonomy to just kind of put out whatever you want. But for me, it was very important not to like to still have a high quality book because a lot of times when people think self-published, they kind of have, it can kind of get that reputation of, oh, it's not as good quality. It's not, you don't have an editor checking over everything. So I think it's for me at least, it was still very important to try to put in as many of those steps as I could. Like I had beta readers, I had, an editor that I hired, just try to do it as professionally as possible, but it definitely eliminates that barrier to entry, which especially for people like us, I think that's important because there can be, even it just like there is in any other industry, any other space, there's barriers, that we face that, other groups may not face when trying to publish a book as well.
I went, I guess, the traditional route. So I went with a publishing company called 𝐂𝐤𝐳𝐧𝑆 Studios. And they are all about women empowerment. And they have lots of, books, anthologies with just women coming together. So it wasn't too difficult for me to shop around with them because it seems like, once you have your idea, they help to get everything together. And so they helped with the editing, putting it on Amazon, putting it on, the all the marketing flyers and whatnot, the cover picture, they did all of that, but I did all the writing. They did all the formatting. So I'm not quite sure how self-publishing works, but my friend Bridget here does. So, I went that route. So, you have options if you choose to publish a book.
Yeah. And I'm gonna say maybe you and Bridget can talk about that. Maybe,
Mhm.
you might self-publish your next one or but I do want to ask this question too, because I know that a lot of times that when you are building something and you are going through the process, that there are a lot of moments where you might feel overwhelmed, with writing a book. So I want to know who kept you grounded and motivated during those difficult times.
That is definitely a big one, right? Especially when you're dealing with imposter syndrome to overcome. You have to navigate publishing timelines. Since I worked with a publisher, they gave me timelines for when I needed drafts to be given to them. You're building something new. I often found myself like reconnecting to the why. Why am I doing this? Because I'm busy. I have a business to run. I'm a full-time professor. I need to find time to write. I'm a mom. And, I doing this for my son, for him to see me, putting something out there, the time I spent writing, I would just say to him, hey, mommy has to write right now. And I hope he remembers it when he gets older. Those were some of the things that helped me feel grounded, but also knowing the need for it. Because for many people in in public health and health equity, we have that purpose that is so rooted in community impact, improving access. We're talking about expanding representation, and I know that this is so needed. Danielle, I donated some books to the conference last year, especially for students. So, and I also wanted to make sure that my book was written at a way where somebody entry level could understand what it means to work in the field of clinical research. It's not written with a lot of scientific jargon. So I kept trying to think about my why, knowing that our outcomes tend to be better and improved in our communities when our care is received by someone who is culturally congruent. And that was my reasoning for writing the book, was to get more underrepresented populations into the field of clinical research, let them know that clinical research is a viable, career pathway for them. Also, for people who may be considering a clinical trial or may not have even known that a clinical trial is an option to their care, letting them know that, hey, a clinical trial could be a viable option to your care. So just staying rooted in the why, the bigger picture, the impact of the work was what kind of kept me going when I felt overwhelmed and, did I even want to do this? Because there were times I questioned, do I want to do this? Do I want to add to my plate? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think mine was kind of the same sort of thing, just thinking of my why and how many children and families could be impacted by the book. The process is definitely, I think, difficult because of the timing of everything. I mean, like I mentioned, I first had the idea years ago, but I kind of was like, first, like, okay, let me sit down and finally start writing the book, like actually physically typing it up, like not just in your head, but like typing it up. I want to say that was like summer of 2024 that I was like, okay, let me just write everything down. And it was kind of easy because this book, like I mentioned, is really just it's almost like A through Z, just talking about research terms. Okay. So at first I had to like write down all the words I wanted to use. But then the next stage was like coming up with all the definitions in a way that was just easy to, plain language, easy for people to understand. And now it's surprisingly difficult. So there were a couple times in there that I would start and I would just get so like, okay, I don't know how to explain this. So I would have to kind of stop and then get motivated to start back again. But then when the book was finished, because it's a children's book, I was like, okay, now I need to get an illustrator, but you got to tell the illustrator what you want them to draw. They don't just know what's in your head. So then that it was just kind of like, okay, what do I even want each page to look like for the kids? And so I remember like clearly I went to New York. I think it was last year because I don't know if you know who Bazoma St. John is. She's on Real Housewives of Beverly Hill. Black woman. She is a queen for real. And so she had a book signing for her book. And I went with a friend of mine in New York for the weekend. And literally, like on the way back, I was like, you know what? It was so motivating. She was just like, do the thing. Don't let anything stop you. She talked about how she was like a widow, and then she had like she was a single mom, and then she had like all these high profile jobs where she was like literally dropping her kid at school, driving to the airport, flying to her job at like Google and all these, huge companies that she'd worked for. And she was just like, don't let anything stop you. So like on the way back, my flight got delayed and it got delayed like 2, 3 times and spent the night at the airport. But while I was there, I was like, you know what? Let me get out my sketchbook. I'm gonna start sketching these illustrations right now. Just I was like, don't let anything stop you. You've been talking about this book for years. And so it's just finding that motivation and just finding the time to do it, I think is the hardest thing. And so if anybody's contemplating writing, I would just say you just got to find your why and then also just find some motivation that can keep you going until you can get it done. Because, on top of all the things that we're doing in life, it can definitely get hard when you're trying to add, like creating a whole thing from scratch on top of that.
Yeah, so it sounds like having tunnel vision,
Mhm.
and focusing on like what we mentioned, focusing on your why is so important because there are times when you're like, I didn't sign up for all of this, or this is a little bit difficult, but it's definitely amazing to hear, your journey and how y'all were able to navigate that. I do want to ask a question about, with writing this book, do you feel like this has enhanced or expanded your clinical research profession? Do you feel like this, because a lot of times people say, write a book, you're going to level up and you're going to how have y'all experienced that since writing the book?
I definitely have, and I would say it's just because I can reach more people now. So like before, I could only reach people who were like in my individual, like day to day, whether it's at work or school. But with the book, I can reach so many more people. And with that, comes just in the writing of the book, you're having to like really like research again things that you thought you knew, but you just want to make sure that you're, not misleading people or not miscommunicating. So I had to kind of like study up on some things, but then it just helps you reach so many more people than you could before. And whether that's just through the book itself or through speaking to people in connection with the book. So, I definitely feel like it has enhanced my career in a way that wasn't really possible without having the book as sort of the thing to kind of like be the like lead into why, um, kind of like be the entry point into the conversation that I'm having with people about research that I couldn't have before.
Yeah, because now when you write a book, everyone wants you to come, they want you to come speak, and hopefully they flying you out to all of these places too if they if they want you to speak at these different
Hmm.
places. What about you, Nadine?
Absolutely. Everything Bridget just said, it certainly enhanced, credibility and people recognizing, your name more in the field. The university where I work, I've had students reach out to me. I can't really sell my book to them, but they've seen that I have the book because the university also shared it on their social media, right? So students have reached out to me saying, "Hey, I've been reading your book. I really want to enter into the field of clinical research," or people reaching out for podcasts or, even interviews like this. So it's certainly really, helped to enhance, name recognition and, credibility in the field, I will say.
Thank you for that. And I want to, before I hand it over to Courtney, I want to let you ladies know that I gave the books, a lot of the books, Nadine, went to college students as well at the conference and people who were new to the clinical research industry. And this week, Bridget, when I was doing the Black History Month par excel, I would say presentation, they asked about being able to show up at schools and talk about clinical research. So I
Hmm.
mentioned your book and I put the link in the chat as well so that all of the Par Excel employees could check out your book. So
Thank you.
I'm gonna say kudos to the both of you guys for writing the book, but I'm going to hand it over to Courtney.
Thank you, Danielle. And I can attest to that, Nadine, because when you mentioned giving the book out at the conference, I was like, wait a minute, I didn't get a copy of that book, and I'm trying to figure out why. So now I know why. So now I don't feel
They were
terrible.
primarily for students and new people to clinical research.
It's okay. It's okay. I have
I
no
hope all the
problem.
students left with one.
I have no problem with purchasing.
You're
It's
not new. Look,
okay.
Courtney, you're not new anymore.
I know.
You're a veteran. You can call
I
yourself a
know.
veteran.
But I still like to get things to give to other people, so, but it's fine, Nadine, I'll buy it. It's fine because it's worth it, I'm sure. So, leading to that, Nadine, you were speaking about being invited on like different podcasts and wanting to be interviewed and things like that. Most of the time when us working in clinical research, we are so used to being in the background of things. So what skills from your clinical research experience translated most naturally into your writing and publishing careers? If you don't mind, Nadine, please begin.
Sure. So I once worked at an employer, and when I talked to them about wanting to improve representation in the research studies, I was told this is not a priority of the department right now, right? And that kind of felt like a slap to the face. So my experience, my lived experience working in the field, seeing what I saw in terms of recruitment, wanting to do more for the people who look just like me, I'm an underrepresented person in clinical research,
Mhm.
right? I live in Georgia. I know what maternal outcomes are like here in Georgia. In fact, I
Mhm.
faced it. I'm actually with, carrying right now, and it's one of my biggest fears. Considering what I went through the last time and the systemic racism I lived through in the hospital. So my experience, my lived experience, seeing what I saw day to day in my career, working in clinical research, really drove me towards writing the book and influenced how I wrote it. I started at the beginning about how I entered into the field, where I ended up, and why I was writing the book. So certainly I would say lived experience, what I was seeing every single day when I went to work played a role in how I wrote, probably how my voice came out in writing the book and everything, the passion that flowed in it, and, all of that went into writing the book.
I love that. Thank you. Bridget, please. Especially writing a children's book. Like,
Yeah, well, the funny thing is, I always say, so one of the things I learned from our marketing coach was like, you just have to pick like your one person, meaning like the main person in your audience that the book is for. And I'll circle back to that in a second. But for the first question, so the transferable skills from research, really for me, like I mentioned, is I just was like first and foremost an educator, especially when I worked as an auditor. There were a lot of times, and even the IRB too, there were just a lot of times when you would give like a finding or you would like send back a modification or whatever to like an investigator, for example. And you can't just send it back and be like, change this. You have to explain, like, according to this regulation, per the regs, this is the reason why, this is the way that it is. And so I just got very used to having to really break things down for people. And even though it's called the Kids Guide to Clinical Research, I like to think that it is something that not only research teams can use to share what they do, but also something that schools can utilize to teach children. So there's like, to me, there's many different audiences, and not all of them are necessarily children. Because as we know, there is a really big health literacy problem in the US. And having something that is a resource that's written at a like 6th to 8th grade level, which is where most adults reading level is, was really my goal. So that, you can say it's for kids, but then, their parents are reading it or their teachers reading it or whoever's reading it. So for me, it was just the education piece, being able to take, I mean, even if I'm speaking to an investigator, like they just want to hear it in plain language. Like, what do you want me to fix and why? And so just being able to kind of cut to the point, be really brief with an investigator, like back in the days, being able to, have that sort of skill set was something that I really transferred into the book. Like, what is just the simplest way that I could explain this complex topic? I would also say project management because, especially being self-published, there's just a lot of self-imposed deadlines. Like nobody's forcing me, there's not a contract on the line. There's nothing like that. It's like I decided this is what I want to do and this is how I have to do it. But then, for example, when I hired my illustrator, he was somebody that I found I really loved his artistic style. But, yes, I'm paying you, but he was just kind of on his own sort of timeline. So just having to be like, okay, here's our set schedule. Here's the milestones. When you do X, I will pay you like, so just really being organized and being able to like motivate somebody else to stay on a timeline and get something done. That's definitely a research, a research skill, being able to give feedback to somebody. So there were just a lot of parallels really working on something for a really long time. Like if you worked on a protocol from the very beginning until the stage that it actually gets up and running. Like, so there were just a lot of parallels that I experienced along the way. And so that was, the times that I was really like thankful for my training in research because it really kind of helped to kind of keep me on course and keep me organized and be able to like achieve that goal of finally getting the book done.
and that's great. And it's really important that, being able to do that because you hear about people doing things for themselves. So you don't have to give to anyone else. You don't have to cut anyone else in. So it's really important to be able to keep the things flowing because, you're putting your time and your effort into it. And of course, we know time is money, so you want your return on investment, but you also want to ensure that, what you're wanting to tell to the community is getting out. So being able to utilize your project management skills so well to get this thing done. What was something that you can say you learned from this process that you didn't necessarily know before?
I mean, the biggest thing that I learned, and really, like I mentioned, that I'd hired a book coach, and really, so she was not helping me write the book. I had to write the book. You had to basically come with your book written, but she taught the marketing process of like, you can't just hit publish on Amazon and be like, hey, so hey guys, my book is here. Family and friends, buy my book. Like, no. If you really want to be taken seriously, it starts maybe before the book is even finished. I had my book finished, but I don't think the illustrations were finished when I started marketing it. So she taught me how to be strategic about it. I think I announced it on like maybe World Book Day, the year before it came out, and was just really organized in like, okay, this is what I'm going to post about it. Where am I going to post about it? Where is my audience at? And really doing all that research to find out how you can reach the ideal reader for the book and the people it's going to help the most. And so I did a lot of that and just being very organized, posting every week, engaging with my audience, going to places where I feel like my audience would be at. Like those are all things that, I really had to pull in like a lot of management to kind of stay on top of all of that. And that's not to say it went perfectly because the book actually, I think it came out a month later than I originally had intended. But it all worked out in the end. But just having that plan in place just kind of really helped me to like, correct the things that needed to be corrected so I could kind of get across that finish line and still kind of have the impact that I wanted to around the time that I wanted to have it.
Awesome. And delayed is never denied.
Mhm.
Nadine, what did you learn from your publishing journey?
So one of the things I learned from my publishing journey was how quickly things can change, right? So you can be up there on Amazon and be number two right now, and then 40 minutes later, you're in the 400s. So well, that's one of the things I learned in this on this publishing journey was, like what was regarding like how quickly things can change. The other thing is like Bridget mentioned, it's not just a matter of you uploading onto Amazon or you're telling your friends and family you're putting your blood, sweat, and tears into this. So you want sales, you want some return on your investment. So, I mean, I didn't really pay for any marketing. I just so far have lucked out, I guess, sharing word of mouth, LinkedIn, posting on every single social media platform, sharing, texting, annoying people.
Mhm.
But somehow it's been working. If you look at my LinkedIn profile right now, you see my book is on the backdrop. My website for my business, the first thing you see is my book. So, those are some of the things I've had to learn because I'm not a marketing person. And these are some of the things I've had to learn in terms of, how do I get the most out of this book? Yeah.
Yeah, it is very hard when you are not used to putting yourself out there like that. So, but I will say, like, it is a new era to walk into as well because you are so smart and you both are so strong and you have so much to give to the world. So it's like it's pushing you forward without even knowing that you needed to be pushed forward. So it's beautiful to see because it gives other people the true view into what it is that we do. You know, it helps to heal that generational curse that we all hate so deeply. Um, and it's just beautiful to see. So with and I love the fact that you both went on different publishing journeys. And I'm not quite sure if you touched on it or not, but what made you decide to choose the journey, the publishing journey or pathway that you chose? If you don't mind, Nadine, please.
For me, it was, I didn't know how to publish a book on my own. I mean, kudos to you, Bridget. You went the self-publishing route. I was really worried I'd make a lot of mistakes, right? I didn't know what to do. So I aligned myself with a publisher and, they helped with navigating a lot of the things I wouldn't have known what to do because they've done this probably thousands, tens of thousands of times before with other authors. So for me, it was more of I don't have to reinvent the wheel since this was not my wheelhouse. That's why I chose that route.
Awesome. Bridget, what about you?
For me, I think some of it might have just been maybe. So I'm very interested to hear Nadine's experience because I think some of mine might have just been like the only publishers that I'm really aware of, because I like to read a lot. It's just kind of those big names. And I wasn't as familiar with like, smaller imprints or independent imprints that I thought would like, would I'd have success at in getting my book with. So it just kind of didn't even cross my mind. It's like, oh, that's a pathway to go. I had been, just kind of on YouTube, got kind of pulled into that algorithm where I was hearing from a lot of self-published authors. And, just hearing that path and learning more about it, it just seemed very appealing to me. And so I was like, okay, I can do that. I can follow a process and just get it out there. I will say it does put like more of the burden on you. But, I felt like, okay, this is something that, with the right guidance, I felt like I could do it. And so I went with a company, it was called Shep House Publishing, Black owned company that helps with the self-publishing process. And I was lurking in her YouTube videos for a very long time before I felt comfortable of like, okay, I think she knows what she's talking about. She's published books before. But I think the thing that really cemented it for me was I ended up seeing I had a friend who had published a book and then she was being recognized somewhere. And then one of the people that was being recognized with her had written a children's book. And so I was like, oh, that's neat. And so when I went to that young lady's profile, I found out that, oh, she was, she came through the same program that I was considering. And so I was like, okay, okay. So I reached out to her on like Instagram and I just kind of asked her, like, how was your experience? What was it like? And so I was able to interview her. And that really made me feel comfortable with, okay, so this person who is saying that they can help me to self-publish my book and help me to, make the impact that I want to make, they're legit. And so I felt really comfortable that like, okay, I can follow it's like just in a research protocol. I can follow a protocol. I can follow this self-publishing process and get the book, get that piece of the book out because the writing the book, even the coming up with the illustrations, the words, all of that, like I that was already within me. But the publishing piece and the marketing piece, I mean, I like to be in the background. I don't really like to be all, but just that piece was where I felt like I needed some just kind of help and training to kind of help me get in that mindset that you have to get into to put the book out.
Lovely. Just not being afraid to reach out to those who know. It's like if you
Mhm.
don't know something, you should not be afraid to reach out to someone who does. It's
Mhm.
the worst thing that they're going to tell you is no. And then what? You still don't have the information. Okay, moving on to the next person that might know,
Mhm.
you know? Um, so with all of this being said, through the whole process, through the whole coming up with the idea and writing the ideas down and putting them together, what are the most common mistakes that you believe first-time authors should avoid? Because we do have some in the audience who want to be
Mhm.
authors.
I think I would say just the quality piece. Anything that I think you're doing is worth doing well. And so, whether you choose self-publishing, if you choose traditional publishing route, just really putting like your best effort into it. Because, I think we all know people who have like published a book and then you look at it and you're just kind of like, oh, that wasn't really, especially with self-publishing, anybody literally can publish it. And so you see like spelling errors and you're seeing all these things. So I think it can be really easy to think that that's just so easy and simple, but to really be, I think to put your best foot forward, you really need to take it very seriously. I mean, having, people that you don't know read the book, because, yeah, you can have your family friends read it. Oh, that's cute. That's good. Yeah. But no, like, hire a professional editor. That's very easy. Like Upwork, Fiverr, places like that. But also having people who are in your audience read it because I was very close at the end to where I needed to get my book out. I'd already was over my deadline. And so I did have one round of beta readers read it. And then the feedback they gave me, some of them gave me it was so good, but I was just like, oh, if I put another edition out, I'm going to incorporate that because I was already kind of a little too far along in the process. So I made some edits that I could, but I couldn't do all of the things they told me. And so just actually giving yourself the time to do a good job at it would be kind of like my big advice.
Yes, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Nadine, what about you?
Mhm.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, there's so many mistakes, right? And I've written one book and I certainly made some of them myself. I would say the first one for me would be the time commitment, underestimating the time commitment. I thought it would have been faster. I knew everything in my head that I wanted to put in the book, right? But then writing actually takes time, and I was a little bit unprepared for all the drafting and the editing and the revision. So that was, if someone had told me that before, at least I would have known that ahead of time, right? I would, I jumped into it with an outline, but I'm also a planner. Like I had an outline, that's how I started it. So I think that's something that some, first time writers may neglect, might be that structure to keep everything coherent. Another thing, and especially for me, would be overcomplicating the language. So this is clinical research, and we know we have a lot of technical jargon in the field, right? But when it came to my target audience, especially, people who are navigating new into the field and teaching them how to climb that corporate ladder, I wanted to make sure it was clear and, easy to read and easy to follow. And I've heard that from some of the students who've read my book. Um, Bridget also touched on this, making sure you have somebody review it. I had one of the site owners that I've consulted. One of the site owners read my book and gave me some feedback early on before it came out. Of course, I was worried. I was like, what if he leaks this and then my book never sells? But no, that didn't happen. But it went through my mind, but it didn't happen. Don't ignore your audience. Just make sure you know who you're writing for, and what you want them to take away. So I think that could be, one of the challenges. There, it was easy for me to get carried away, but I kept trying to come back to this is who I want my book for. Let me tailor this out. Let me take this out because I don't want it to be huge. There's an editing process. The publisher had an editing, there's refining things. They might be changing things that I didn't necessarily agree with, right? But a lot of times I realized when they changed things, it was for clarity. In my head, it made sense, but in the editor's head, it was like, "What are you saying, Nadine?" So, a lot of times it was for clarity. So don't get too caught up on that. It's for the better of your book. Um, and yeah, I think that's pretty much it for me in terms of mistakes a new writer can make.
And it's funny that you say that because, allowing yourself the time, and we know being in this field, time is everything. Time is so important, and we tend to not have enough of it. So, how did you manage the demands of writing while maintaining your full-time career? Please, Nadine, if you
Ooh,
start.
that one was a hard one. So there were times, and I have a little 5-year-old. He's 5 now. The book came out last year, so I was writing when he was what, 2, 3 or so. So a lot of it was writing after he went to bed, or staying up till like 1 o'clock in the morning or so, just refining a draft, trying to make it perfect or as close to perfect as possible, doing back and forth, redoing the first chapter before even moving on to the second. So just making sure I found that time to do it. Sometimes it was, early in the morning, waking up at 6 o'clock to spend an hour writing and then getting him ready for school, and then starting my workday. So it just had to carve out that time. And sometimes it was weekend times that I spent writing
I
and
totally.
researching, not just writing, but
Oh, yes,
researching
that too.
that
Yeah.
part.
Bridget, please, how did you manage your life?
Yeah, same thing for me. I mean, weekends, late at nights, holidays. It's funny. I think one of the first posts that I put about like when I first started actually typing out the book, it was like Memorial Day weekend, I think 1 year. And I had made a post. That's how I remember it. Because I was like, how are you starting your Memorial Day weekend? I'm, working on something new or something like that. But yeah, just taking advantage of all that time because there were some days, after a day of work, you're like, just kind of like in a mental fog. And then with the kids at times, just trying to plan around their activities, but, waking up early, especially on a Saturday or a Sunday. For me, batching out like content that I wanted to share to market the book, it's just all very, like, it just takes a level of time management. And it still took a long time, but it would have taken even longer if I didn't just really like lock in at times and just really kind of carve out the time to get things done. Especially once you set a deadline for yourself and really get serious about it, then it's just like you just got to make it happen.
Yeah, it's kind of like keeping a promise to yourself. This is something
Mhm.
that you wanted to do. Just like you wanted to go to college, you wanted to get your degrees, you got them, and the only way that you were able to get them is to keep yourself motivated and to keep yourself
Mhm.
going. So that's a good reminder to have just for anything that we want to give our, time and effort to,
Yeah.
making sure that it's worth the effort.
And I was going to say, especially too, when you make an announcement about it, that's when it gets real. So
Yeah.
that when I started getting close to the end, I was like, you know what? I'm not all the way done,
Yeah.
but I'm just going to announce it anyway. And that's going to push me to get done because, we're not trying to look crazy out, out in these streets. So, yeah,
Right.
because I also did a pre-order for my book, which is a different strategy you can do for your sales. It's kind of harder to do if you're self-published, but once you hit that pre-order and people have paid you for this book, it's like, oh, okay. Like you definitely got to get the book done because you don't want
Gotta
to be
get a
looking
product.
really crazy.
Got to get a product out. So
Yeah.
before we get to the questions in the chat, I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. We were supposed to end at 8, but we are going to probably go over on time a little bit because we started a little late. But the links for both of our guests' books have been dropped in the chat. If you would like to connect with our guests, we will also have their LinkedIn's posted in the chat if you all want to do that, or if Danielle can do that. If not, I will do that while we get these last questions answered. Also, if you just want to connect with any of your other sisters that are here now, also put your LinkedIn in the chat and we will get connected with you all. So the first question that we have is from Miss Desiree Powell. And the question was, have you struggled with writer's block? If so, how did you overcome it?
I think I did at first, but the issue with me was I am like a planner in my head, and so it was very hard for me to even start typing a word on the computer until I had it all worked out in my head. So I think that was why it probably took a couple of years for me to just even so it's not writer's block in the sense I would sit down and couldn't write anything, but I just could not even type one word until I had it all worked out mentally. So how did I deal with it? I mean, I just kept on like thinking and looking up things and just trying to, work through how could this come out? What would be the best way to do things? Um and sometimes, I would kind of jot some notes down, but then revisit them maybe like a week or two later and be like, no, that's not quite how I want to do it. But I think I went through that process more mentally than anything. And I really pretty much had it like 90% of the way fleshed out before I actually sat down to start typing. But just do it in pieces. Maybe you don't have to have the whole book written. Can you just write the first page? Can you just write the first chapter? Can you just write a table of contents or like an outline? I think Nadine had mentioned, just kind of take it in pieces so you can, knock it out eventually.
Yeah,
Oh
lovely.
yeah, writer's block is a big one. And for me, the outline helped. There were so many thoughts going on in my head. It was like, how do I start writing? Where do I start doing this first, right? Like, what do I start with first? But having that outline helped. And I did have to refine the outline along the way because, what I started with, certain things changed and I needed to
Mhm.
flow more, flow better. So I did have to change the outline along the way. The other thing was like notes to self. So while I was working, my regular job, sometimes something would just pop into my head from my book. And then I'd put a note. There's an app called Trello that I use. I use the free version. And I'll just plop something in there. I have a column for the book, and I'll just put a note to myself, make sure you address this in the book. So these were, just some having some sort of way to keep everything organized. Sometimes there were sticky notes I'd write on my desk, like if something new popped into my head to add to the book, to just keep the momentum going and not be too stuck on that writer's block.
Wonderful. Does anyone that is present would like to come off of mute and ask a question that they might have? Going once, going twice. Okay.
Wait,
Well,
wait, 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 wait.
oh,
It's Desiree again.
okay.
I have the question about writer's block. So this is kind of connected to writer's block. It's also motivation. So like sometimes like I have great ideas and I can write them down or I'll have an outline, but then well, imposter syndrome or whatever jumps in, some kind of devilish function. And I am completely deflated and demotivated and I struggle. So I don't know. What do you deal with that? How do you deal with that?
I would recommend just to try to find groups of other writers. That's a big thing that was helpful to me because, you can just be in community with people who are kind of in the same process as you and get ideas from them and you share ideas with them. I just think that's the big thing because, I mean, once I did that, I saw people writing all kind of books. And you're just like, oh, like you have a voice, you have a unique perspective and the world needs to hear that and really psyching yourself out of that. One of the big things that my coach would say was like, God has put a calling or a talent on your life. Who are you to say that it's not good enough to put out there for the person who needs to hear it? And so I would just try to remind myself that people need to hear this, people need this. And that just kind of helped me get outside of myself whenever I would be feeling like, oh, is this even important? Like, who's going to read? No, that is your calling, and that is what has been uniquely put in you to impact the world. So you would be doing the world a disservice if you did not put it out.
That was good. Nadine, do you have anything to add to that? Or
No, I
that,
think Bridget
that
kind of
whooping good enough?
Bridget kind of answered that one.
I want to add something. I want to say my husband always says this a lot of times. And when you go to the bread aisle, there's so many different types of breads. And I think a lot of
Mhm.
times we think, in a sense, how is my bread going to be any different from, everybody else's bread? But your bread is unique. And just looking at the bread aisle, you know that there's room and space for you. So if you have an idea about a book, go ahead and write it. Reach out to Nadine, reach out to Bridget, ask some questions. I'm sure they wouldn't have a problem. I already put their LinkedIn URL in the chat. So uh, I'm pretty sure you guys are going to get hit up. But yeah, I think it's important, like what we always say with Black women in clinical research, to surround yourself around, people. Like if you want to be a writer, surround yourself around other people who have written books. So this is just something that you do. So Desiree, I'm hoping that you will be able to connect with them and very soon see your book as well. But
Mhm.
I've contemplated it myself. I can't even tell you how many times people have even told me, Danielle, you need to write a book. So I need to reach out to
And you
y'all.
do.
Yes, so I need to reach out to y'all as well. My husband has been telling me for years to write a book. So I'm about to say since
Yeah.
starting BWICR, he told me that I needed
Mhm.
to write a book just about how the whole process, because every time you go somewhere, someone's asking you, how did you do this? What's your story? What made you create Black women in clinical research? So I feel like everyone has a story to share. So if you have something and it keeps like the strings keep pulling on your heart to write a
Mhm.
book, stop waiting, start, like they mentioned, join writing clubs or organizations that are, local. My aunt, she also wrote a book and they asked her to speak somewhere in Houston, I think. So she's supposed to go to some speaking event, I think, in Houston. And so now that she wrote one book, she has like a ton of books now that she has. But yeah, I feel like once you start, you're not going to be able to stop. So I'm expecting to see more books too, and the book that you're working on too as well, Nadine. I can't wait to see it. And so that's your motivation. I'm sending the positive vibes out there so that we will see your book soon, and hope
Can,
everything comes together for you.
can I say something, Danielle?
Yes, Miss Sharon, of course you
Okay.
can.
So I really enjoyed this. I love reading, just like Bridget mentioned, and planning to buy Nadine's book. I've already bought several of Bridget's. And what I've
Thank
started
you.
doing when I do community education, I'll do like a quiz at the end. And so I've been giving one of Bridget's books as a prize to the person who gets the largest number of answers correct.
Mhm.
And it's just a joy to be able to promote a book about clinical research written by African
Mhm.
American woman. So congrats to both of you all. And thank you for
Thank
this
you. And thank you
evening.
for your support.
Thank you, ladies. Really appreciate the support.
Yep, and I'm wishing y'all all the book sales. So
Okay, I'm
let it
gonna.
overflow.
Yes,
I
very much.
receive it.
Yes. So Thank you all for who was able to join us tonight. Once again, we have all of our LinkedIn URLs dropped in the chat. We also have the links for both of our guests' books. Do not forget, we also have a ACRP membership for Black women in clinical research. I think tonight is the last night for the discounted price, Danielle.
Yes.
We also have a link in here for Black Girl Vitamins. If you joined us last night on Wind Down Wednesday, we had a good talk about Black Girl Vitamins and what they have to offer, how they've been helping, how we need to get better about our health, which includes taking a multivitamin and getting our minerals up. So please get that code and get you 20% off your first order. I got my first order and I put it on subscribe. So my second order done came in already. Get like me. Get healthy. 2026. Yes. All
Right.
right. Thank y'all. Thank y'all. Thank y'all. Have a lovely evening. We love you, and we will see you next time.
Thank
Have a
you.
good
Bye.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Thank you.